The cattle industry in the American West underwent significant changes between 1877 and 1900, marked by the decline of the beef bonanza and the transformation of cattle ranching practices. The beef bonanza, which had driven the rapid expansion of cattle ranching across the Great Plains, began to falter in the late 1880s due to a combination of factors that included changing consumer tastes, economic shifts, and environmental challenges. As the United States became more urbanized and industrialized, consumer preferences started to shift away from the tough, lean beef of the Texas Longhorns, which had dominated the early cattle drives. Urban markets, particularly in the East, began to favor higher quality, more tender beef that was produced by cattle breeds such as Herefords and Angus, which were raised on more carefully managed ranches. This change in taste led to a decrease in demand for the Longhorns that had fueled the cattle drives of the earlier decades. Additionally, overgrazing on the open range led to the depletion of grasslands, which made it increasingly difficult to sustain large herds of cattle. The falling prices for beef, driven by both market saturation and the costs associated with transporting cattle to distant markets, further eroded the profitability of the industry. The hard winters of 1886 to 1887, often referred to as the Big Die-Up, delivered a devastating blow to the cattle industry. These winters were marked by severe blizzards and freezing temperatures, which caught many ranchers unprepared. The widespread practice of open-range grazing, where cattle roamed freely without fences or substantial shelter, left herds vulnerable to the harsh weather. As a result, hundreds of thousands of cattle died from exposure and starvation, leading to massive financial losses for ranchers. The catastrophic impact of these winters underscored the unsustainability of the open-range system and marked the end of the beef bonanza. The collapse of the beef bonanza and the lessons learned from the hard winters of the mid-1880s transformed cattle ranching in the West. Ranchers began to adopt more intensive and scientific methods of cattle management, which included fencing in their lands, growing hay for winter feed, and selectively breeding their cattle to produce higher quality beef. The introduction of barbed wire in the 1870s played a crucial role in this transformation, as it allowed ranchers to fence off large tracts of land at a relatively low cost. This shift from open-range grazing to enclosed ranching created more controlled and sustainable operations, reducing the risks associated with weather and overgrazing. However, it also marked the end of the vast, unfenced ranges that had characterized the early days of cattle ranching on the plains. The end of the open range had a profound impact on the cowboy, whose role in the cattle industry was fundamentally altered by these changes. During the beef bonanza, cowboys were central to the industry, driving large herds of cattle across the plains on long cattle drives to railheads, from where the cattle would be shipped to markets in the East. These drives required endurance, skill, and a deep knowledge of the land, and they played a significant role in the romanticized image of the cowboy as a rugged, independent figure of the West. However, as ranching practices shifted towards enclosed operations and more stationary cattle management, the demand for cowboys diminished. The work of the cowboy became more localized, focusing on tasks such as herding cattle within fenced ranches, repairing fences, and managing smaller herds. The long cattle drives, which had defined the cowboy's life and work, became a thing of the past, leading to a decline in the number of cowboys needed and altering the nature of the profession. The changes in the cattle industry from 1877 to 1900 marked the end of an era in the American West. The beef bonanza, once a symbol of the boundless opportunities and vast open spaces of the plains, gave way to a more structured and sustainable form of cattle ranching that was better suited to the changing economic and environmental realities of the time. While the cowboy continued to exist as a vital part of ranching life, the decline of the open range and the end of the cattle drives signaled the passing of the old ways and the beginning of a new, more modern phase in the history of the West.